With the Raimi trilogy out of the way, it is time that we jump into The Amazing Spider-Man featuring Andrew Garfield on Film Talk. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. As always, I'm your host, Bryan Schink. I'm joined with my good friend and fellow host, Hunter Farris. Hunter, how you doing today?
Had some of the best sleep that I've had in weeks. Anybody who knows me knows that sleep is hard for me, but it's good to finally have good sleep for once.
Well, that is very, very good. Yeah, sleep is very important.
All right. So, brief summary of the Amazing Spider-Man. Didn't actually prepare a brief summary of the Amazing Spider-Man. Let me try this again. So, Peter Parker plays a Peter Parker plays an Peter Parker is an angsty loser at Midtown Science High School who meets a cute girl named Gwen, who's on the debate team, and who works at a massive research facility called Oscorp. Peter visits Oscorp, where he finds that the visits Oscorp to meet the research partner of his missing father in order to reconnect with his father, and in the process triggers a chain of events that leads both to Peter becoming Spider-Man and the research partner Kurt Connors becoming the Lizard. Um, Uncle Ben Uncle Ben dies. Peter goes looking for Uncle Ben's killer. Um, and just after and gets into some trouble with the police because the police rightfully see him as a vigilante. Um, and he, gosh, having a little bit of a change of heart around Uncle Ben's killer and being willing to not get revenge for Uncle Ben, he sees an opportunity, found powers to save a bunch of people on a bridge from the lizard, and then it is trying to turn all of New York City into giant lizard people in an attempt to make humanity in an attempt to forcefully evolve humanity, one are trying to stop him. That's about the best that I got. I know that was a very scattered summary.
Oh, dude, it's all good. Trust me. All of my summaries are about the exact same when it comes to coherence and understandability. Actually, mine are probably worse. So you're good. You're good, man. But yeah, that it's a very. It's supposed to be a very straightforward story. However, I had a lot of problems following it while I was watching the movie, especially like when Connors went from just being a scientist who wanted to help people with disabilities like himself regain the function of their limbs to I'm going to turn the entire world into lizard men. I didn't really catch where that transition was. And then when they explained it later, I was like, but would that really be the first leap in logic that you would take, or would it go to I don't know dispersing all the spray inside of a hospital so that all the patients who have like missing arms or other illnesses would get it first. But that's my original issue with like the story bits of the entire film. Other than that, though, I thought this was a good film. Although there are some other issues, but I thought it was good. I thought it was good.
Along those lines, I assumed that Connor's motivation was essentially that the serum messed with his mind, and that I assumed that he didn't have a rational motivation.
Gotcha. So, sort of like Green Goblin, almost like just like a reset, a
Yes,
retooling of Green Goblin for this
exactly
new
like the
one.
Green Goblin. person,
Okay.
except bigger
Right, right.
and communicating with. Actually, I really do think that they took advantage of a lot of really cool stuff of the lizard from the comics. They took advantage of his biochemical prowess. They took advantage of his ability to communicate with lizards. They took advantage of his regenerative abilities, of his thick, scaly skin. Like they look like all of the lizard's powers from the comics that I can remember and put into one movie. Props to them for that.
Oh, definitely, definitely. The design could have used some work. Like, the face specifically didn't look anything like the lizard from the comics, which comic book accuracy doesn't matter all the time, except for in this case, I think it would have looked better if he had a snout rather than just like a flat human face. 'Cause it just looked
Oh
unproportioned
yeah,
to
that would
me.
have looked better.
But
Or at
also,
least cool.
oh, go ahead.
I just yeah, that sounds like it would have been a good design.
Okay. I wish he would have been in his lab coat more, because in the comics, like Kurt Connors as the Lizard was almost always wearing the lab coat. It was like part of his design. In the movie, we get two shots of him wearing the lab coat, and both times he rips it off his back, which I don't know. It's a nice homage to the comics look and design of the Lizard, but I wish we would have gotten to see him in the lab coat more.
One of the things that I find really interesting is how much they don't borrow from the Ultimate comics. And I'm including the lizard's design here. Like the lizard looks radically different in the Ultimate comics. He's more what is that, a gecko? Like
I'm
if
not
you go
sure.
look up a picture of what the lizard looks like in the Ultimate comics, he's got gray scales. He's got a he's got a dorsal fin on his back and on his head. Like he looks like Gecko's not the right lizard. I can't remember which type of lizard is. A
Hmm.
very different type of lizard, but the type of lizard that would be like 6 inches long, just huge. He doesn't look like a dinosaur. And a lot of this movie feels like one of the few Spider-Man properties that doesn't borrow from the Ultimate Comics. At least not nearly as much. This movie is the amazing Spider-Man movie. To go back to Spider-Man's roots of like how he was back in the 60s, but try to do him in a way that fits during the superhero boom.
Right. It kind of looks like a
So like
mix
Jane
between a
be the love interest.
raptor and a pterodactyl.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Never thought about it that way, but yeah, so for example, instead of having Mary Jane be the love interest, Mary Jane was introduced like sometime in the 80s, I want to say. Let me check that. Oh, 60s. Okay. And let me check Gwen Stacy's first appearance. Was introduced just a couple years before Mary Jane, but still,
Huh.
like it's going back to like the first love interest Peter had instead of doing the thing that's like commonly known. And that really works is instead of going with the mythos of who Spider-Man is, instead of focusing on the iconography and on the things that everybody thinks, oh yeah, yeah, that it goes back to who Spider-Man actually was in the 60s comics.
Hmm. So I just looked up on Google real quick because you were you were saying how Gwen Stacy in this movie was introduced because she was the first love interest of Peter. It's actually not correct. His first love interest was Betty Brant.
I was wondering if it was going to be Betty.
I can't speak this morning. I'm sorry. Um, but
Oh,
that
I'm just like having trouble remembering words.
I feel that. That's actually kind of strange. Because I've always seen Betty Brant as just like a colleague to Peter, whether it be in the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films, as the receptionist who in the third film Peter, I don't want to say seduces, um, but
Flirts with.
flirts with.
Has
That's a
sexual
good
tension
word.
with.
And then in the MCU Spider-Man films, she's one of his classmates, which I remember when they came out, it was like this big controversy because Betty Brant was supposed to be older than Peter. That at this point they made her about his age, but I having not really known about Betty Brant, I didn't think anything of it. And honestly, she's like one of my favorite characters in the MCU Spider-Man movies, behind obviously Tom's Peter and Ned Leeds, because Ned Leeds is just the greatest person ever. But above MJ, which is surprising, because I thought I was gonna like Zendaya's MJ more than Betty Brant. But I think Betty, in my opinion, is not even like a better crafted character, even, but just more fun. Um, Especially all of her news segments at the high school, and how it's all so awkward, and then you get that jarring transition to her on the Daily Bugle TikTok account, and she's like so professional and really good at her job. It's really interesting. I hope that they touch on the fact that the Daily Bugle has a TikTok in No Way Home, because if they do that, then we're all canon to the MCU, every single one of us. I think you're still muted.
Sorry about that. One thing that I find really interesting about the Amazing Spider-Man. So we've been watching a lot of the Sam Raimi movies, and then coming into this immediately after Sam Raimi is a huge tonal shift. Movies are big and cartoonish, and they're filmed on film, and they have really bright lighting, and they have exaggerated shots, and the and really fast. And these movies are much more traditional blockbusters visually. And there's a lot more shadows in this. Like the Sam Raimi movies have a lot of bright lights that will have a lot of bright lighting and very few shadows. And when there are shadows, they are very, very deliberate. Even in like Doc Ock's warehouse, there aren't shadows. Even in even in the Goblin's Lair, when the lights are turned off, there still aren't that many shadows. Like these movies are really well lit, and the Amazing Spider-Man is really dim in its lighting. Lots of lots of shadows everywhere. That's not trying to say that the movie is like tonally darker, though it also is tonally darker. So I guess the visuals support the tone here that Peter is a much angrier person in this movie.
Right, and I personally I like the more realistic tone that the Amazing Spider-Man was going for, because as much as I thought the original Tobey Maguire films were very well made, like Sam Raimi is an amazing director. I've I've always been a fan of the more blockbuster style, realistic lighting, realistic like shot composition, stuff like that. Less camp, more I don't know, more realism. And camp is not a bad thing. I do like to see camp in movies every now and then, but I don't know. I just like I like how the Amazing Spider-Man was shot more than the original three. However, I think this movie specifically ranks. If I were to rank them all, it would go obviously Spider-Man 2, then Spider-Man 1, then the Amazing Spider-Man, and then Spider-Man 3. So it ranks up in there with the original Spider-Man films, but I don't know. I don't think it hit as perfect of a chord as as Spider-Man 2 and even the original Spider-Man did, at least with me. It hit more of a chord than Spider-Man 3, obviously, but I don't know. One of the things that I wasn't a big fan of was the inclusion of Peter's parents as like a main plot point of the film. Like I haven't read too many comics. I don't know what Peter's parents' roles were in the comics. However, this kind of felt off to me. The fact that his dad was an engineer who genetically created the spider, or was it tangential in helping create the spider that eventually bit Peter. It made it less chance and almost more, I don't know, destiny. Because that seems like a big thing in Spider-Man's whole whole who Spider-Man is the choice between personal will and destiny, which we're not going to get into because we got into that a lot back in our Spider-Man 2 video. But I don't know. It felt weird. If that makes any sense at
Well,
all.
well, if you're looking for an in-universe explanation, there's a lot of in-universe explanation about that. As for who Richard Parker was in the comics, oh my gosh, I just. Whew. Okay, there are 3 total paragraphs in his Marvel Wiki article. So, like, this probably like, oh, this guy has appeared in 1 issue ever. Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 5 from November. During that issue, we find out that Richard Parker was a freaking secret agent. And I kid you not, he is dressed James Bond. He is wearing a white tailcoat and a red bow tie while holding a gun in a very confident position. Like this guy was recruited by Nick Fury, and like, okay, yes, this is a very different Richard Parker than in this movie. I was hoping that like this mark was a huge deal in like the '60s comics, but like, nope.
Oh wait, that's I did not expect that.
Let me check Richard 10. Maybe they're borrowing from Ultimate Richard Parker. Searching. Okay, I think there was more inspiration from Ultimate Richard Parker, who again was only in 1 issue.
Okay. What was his deal?
At least, he's a scientist who worked for Shield.
Oh yeah. It was probably that, if we're being honest. Because for some reason, most modern day superhero movies, at least Marvel related, are mostly inspired from the Ultimate Comics in terms of characters. It's like the MCU. It's very blatant that a lot of its characters are based off of their Ultimate counterparts, not to the degree of the Hulk ripping the Wasp in half and then eating her like he did in the Ultimate Comics, but in the sense of like their origin stories. Especially when you look at like some characters like Peter Parker, his powers, his best friend, a lot of that stuff is borrowed from the Ultimates, from I think mostly Miles Morales, which is kind of strange, but at the same time it's what they wanted to do, which is fine. This film, that was more than likely a good basis for where they pulled the character of Richard Parker. But I don't know where else, like what else they could have pulled from the Ultimates, but I also haven't read the Ultimates.
So specifically, he was working on he was Super Soldier Serum. He was working with Hank Pym, Franklin Storm, and Bruce Banner. And during when Bruce Banner experimented on himself and turned himself into the Hulk, like he's very much a background character in the Hulk's origin story, but like this kind of tracks with who he is in this movie. In the next movie, though, he's going to be a lot more inspired by the 616 Secret Agent version.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I've also heard that the Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the worst of the Spider-Man films, which I'm not gonna say right off the bat that that's what I believe. However, I've seen clips from it, and I'm not looking forward to it. If like, I'm looking forward to actually seeing if it's true, but it's weird. It's very very weird.
I am really looking forward to to talking about the Amazing Spider-Man 2 with you tonight.
Oh, definitely.
Because I really enjoy this movie.
Well, I'm glad you do. I'm glad you do.
This movie just has so much cool stuff in it. All the visuals look cool. We'll get into that tonight. Just like, right. Please know as you go into it, the people who were saying it's the worst Spider-Man movie are haters. They are going to hate no matter what the movie is.
Right.
Please enjoy the movie on your terms and from your perspective instead of trying to think about what the haters would say, because the haters are gonna hate, and the
demonetized. We are getting demonetized.
Moving on from Taylor Swift lyrics.
But no,
Um,
real quick, I do want to address that because I don't think that everybody who says Spider-Man 2 is the worst Spider-Man film, I don't think they're all haters. Like there are definitely haters out there who are like adamant about it, but I'm willing to bet that there are genuine fans who believe that that is the worst film that Spider-Man's been in, at least in modern era, who aren't just like it's the absolutely worst film. If you like it, you're trash. It's people who are just like the film didn't work, at least for me. Doesn't resonate. All the characters' motivations, I think, are terrible. This and that, because there are good people that don't like that could not like this. There are good people that probably don't like Spider-Man 2, like the Tobey Maguire ones, but it doesn't make them haters necessarily. Now, what makes them haters is if they start telling you that you can't like it, then they're haters. At least that's how I've always interpreted the difference between a fan who doesn't like something and a hater, if that makes sense.
okay, that's fair. In my experience, they are haters.
Okay.
I have yet to see what you're talking about in happening. I'm sure it has happened. I just haven't seen it happen.
Gotcha. I know New Rockstars, like Eric Voss of New Rockstars, doesn't like thinks the film is probably the worst in the of all the new Spider-Man ones, and I wouldn't really quantify him as a hater specifically. He's always like, at least from what I can remember, been an adamant for you like what you like. He reviews everything pretty much these days, and that's why I really like their channel. Like they're very in depth with their breakdowns and very personal when it comes to the stuff that they talk about.
I'm glad. I'm glad. I just haven't seen that, and I'm glad that it's more out there because
Gotcha.
like I like when people are more measured and professional in their reviewing. I'm sorry, my brain is just foggy this morning.
It's all good.
Um.
It's the same here.
Anyway, so what are some things that you think from the Amazing Spider-Man 1?
So I like the suit. Um, I have to agree with for the consensus I've been seeing on the internet that it is probably one of the weaker of the suits of that Spider-Man has had throughout his legacy. Um, it's still a really good suit, but because he's had such great suits in the past and then in the future, such as the suit from Spider-Man, like the original trilogy, as well as, in my opinion, the Iron Spider and the Red and Black from Tom Holland's movies. This one kind of pales in comparison. It's still a really good suit. I just don't think it really gets up there with the caliber of everybody else's stuff. However, the scene of Peter making the suit and getting to see him stitching the suit together and printing the logo on the suit and building the web shooters, that whole scene, I loved that because we haven't seen that outside of this film. We never got to see Tom Holland's Peter building his web shooters or sewing together a suit. All we saw that he was wearing like a hoodie and like shorts and stuff, and the web shooters were already built, and the mask already had the goggles. We didn't really get to see him build his suit until the second movie, in which case he was using Stark Tech. So it felt less personal, whereas the Amazing Spider-Man's felt so personal that it resonated with me because like it looked like something I could make in my house. Granted, I am nowhere near as artistic as Peter Parker is. If I were to try and make my own homemade Spider-Man suit, it would come out looking more like Wish.com's Spider-Man from the Japanese movie and show, which already itself is technically a Wish.com of the regular Spider-Man suit. Um, or maybe it would be more like Etsy.com Spider-Man suit for that one, and then mine would be Wish.com from there. But I really liked the montage of him building his suit and building his tech and stuff. I thought it was really cool.
Along those lines, the whole scene of him building his suit and building his tech, and the fact that Act One in this movie is really, really long. The Lizard doesn't like Kurt Connors doesn't become the Lizard until literally an hour into this movie.
Whew. Although
Uncle Ben dies at. Go ahead.
I was gonna say like, so Kirk Connors becomes a lizard, and then he instantly goes and attacks the bridge, which I think what do you think is the midpoint? The bridge fight or the schoolhouse fight? Because I thought it was the bridge fight, but I can see an argument for the school fight.
I think it's the bridge. I think it's the bridge fight too, because the way that
Okay.
I define a midpoint is the moment near the middle of Act Two radically changes the playing field of the movie, and all of a sudden, Peter is a superhero. He has a supervillain, and the city looks up to him, but the police don't. Actually,
Gotcha.
the
Okay.
police know what's already happening.
Right.
A little bit about the act structure of this movie.
Okay.
I'm just gonna pull up something that I wrote about this.
Alrighty.
Okay, so 15 minutes in, usually where the inciting incident would be going to call that the inciting incident, Peter discovers Kurt Connor's name and his lab. 30 minutes in, Peter gets bit by the spider. That's usually where Act 1 would end. 45 minutes in, 50 minutes in, Peter puts on the mask. 55 minutes in, Peter becomes Spider-Man. An hour and 3 minutes in, Kurt Connors becomes the Lizard, and would probably be about the midpoint of the movie. An hour and 11 minutes in, Peter kisses Gwen and reveals his identity to him. And an hour and 17 minutes in, for the first time, in the midpoint battle on the bridge. Like, this move, like, okay, for clarification, from this movie when I went into it, was that Peter would get bit by the spider 15 minutes in. Like, that we would have one scene of introduce. He would in the next scene, he would be with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and he would hear Kurt Connor's name and find out about his lab. 15 minutes in, 30 minutes in, no, wait, 25 minutes in, Kurt Connors becomes the Lizard. Uncle Ben dies, and Peter becomes Spider-Man. Like, I expected him to be Spider-Man all the way by 30 minutes in. I expected like a very tight, economical, efficient script, and this movie is not trying to be that. This movie is trying to like really Deacon as a hero, both by really getting you to really getting you to see Peter's character arc from this very angry vigilante who's borderline beginning of the movie, he is almost a supervillain. Almost. Not quite. To being yeah, he's an anti-hero beginning of the movie. He's not a hero by any stretch of the imagination. Um, and this movie really wants to get to see his character arc all the way to becoming a hero, and so they make sure that Act One really long, and that there's a lot of just space for things to breathe and for you to really understand this character arc.
Right.
And a lot of people said that this movie was really inspired by Batman Begins.
I could see that. I really could see that.
Like, yeah, like when you look at Act One is when you look at, or at least how long it is before he fully becomes Spider-Man. When you look at the creation montage where he builds all his tech, homemade and DIY everything feels, where like hypothetically this could really happen. Where you look at the shadows in this movie, like yeah, I could see this movie being a lot more instant Begins than by the Sam Raimi movies.
Right. Now, during like once he became the masked vigilante who went around like taking out criminals looking for the guy who killed his uncle, and he started quipping. I don't know if I'm the only one who noticed this, but it kind of felt like Deadpool to begin with. Like the way that he delivered jokes and the types of jokes that he made, it reminded me of Deadpool. Like when he was taking out that car thief, and the car thief goes to get out the door, he just keeps closing the door on him. That sounds like something Deadpool would do. It made me feel like this was a mix between Marvel Comics Deadpool and Spider-Man. Now later on, he became Spider-Man completely, and it lost that Deadpool-esque vibe. But I want to see a movie now where Deadpool takes on the Spider-Man mantle, and it's just it's just Spider-Pool the entire film. I think that would be so cool.
Along those lines, a lot of people have been asking for, a lot of people have been asking him to the MCU, which I get it. A lot of people have been asking for Deadpool to interact with Tom Holland's Peter Parker.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, idea of Deadpool interacting with Spider-Man because he has some um, really good interactions with Spider-Man in the comics. But I don't want him interacting with this Spider-Man.
Hmm.
I want him interacting with Andrew Garfield.
Yes. Although I want to see how he would interact with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Just because like he's less over the top and bombastic than Andrew Garfield's is. Uh, Although, because like Andrew Garfield, I think a conversation between Deadpool and Andrew Spider-Man would be two very similar people talking, whereas Deadpool and Tom Holland's Spider-Man, or even Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, would be this over eccentric uh, Deadpool-esque character in Deadpool, and this very either grounded in like not as like jokey character in Tobey Maguire, or this like young and naive character in Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I think that latter one is a very good like background for like jokes where or Deadpool says something like really grungy and really like adult, and Tom Holland's Peter Parker's like, yeah, okay, I have no idea what that means, but okay.
Yeah, it would be a much bigger, more dynamic. I went and looked it up. Deadpool has never been Spider-Man in the comics. I'm really
Wait,
disappointed by that
no,
fact.
that he got the Venom symbiote and he became like a Spider-Man adjacent character though. I've been watching a guy go through that comic story on TikTok. Let me see if I can pull it up.
He has never been Spider-Man. Like he's never gone by the name Spider-Man. Even though everybody else in the universe insists on calling him Spider-Man. Any No, really, like in universe, Marvel characters keep calling him Spider-Man because they don't know who Deadpool is. Sorry about that. I totally closed out my Discord accidentally.
It's all
Okay.
good. I also just realized I was muted that entire time.
Oh,
So that whole
okay.
section has to be cut out anyway. um,
Where do we want to go back to?
oh, I think it started right about where I was saying that I think that Deadpool should at one point be like take on the mantle of Spider-Man, and I think if he did, it would be very close to Andrew Garfield. And then we talked about
Yep.
how Deadpool and Andrew Garfield's interactions would be really awesome because they're like very close characters. However, I personally think that Deadpool should interact with Tom Holland's Spider-Man because you have that childish naivety of Tom Holland's Peter Parker versus the grungy adult dark humor of Deadpool. And I think that dynamic would make for incredible cinema. Even if it's just a Disney Plus TV show, I think that would work beautifully.
It would absolutely be a way bigger dynamic, a lot more contrast. I just feel like it's so much contrast that like it would be really hard to make feel it might feel jarring to me. That's all. I just looked it up. Wade Wilson has never been Spider-Man. He wore the black suited symbiote. Spider-Man, because in universe nobody knows who Deadpool is, or at least if you know who Deadpool is, that's not a good thing. You don't want to know who Deadpool is. You've probably had an experience with Deadpool, and any experience with Deadpool is a bad thing in universe.
Wasn't
Not to say
there
that
wasn't there a comic panel of Deadpool riding the subway and everybody thinking that he's Spider-Man, and he asks like, if I was Spider-Man, would I be riding the subway? Or was it might have been a bus?
that does sound like something that does sound like something that would happen in a Deadpool comic. I just reason why I look it up is because I think it would be really interesting to see Wade get web Spidey sense and get the ability to wall crawl and get the suit and become Spider-Man in the same sense as like Doc Ock became Spider-Man for a while.
I have an idea on how that could happen, and this is completely out there, but that's the reason that I want to bring it up. So we've got the Marvel Zombies TV show coming out, and in that show,
oh no,
if they've introduced Deadpool before then, here's my idea: have Spider-Man turn into a zombie and bite Deadpool, but instead of Deadpool becoming a zombie, he gains Spider-Man's powers. And make it a whole thing where if a superhero bites Deadpool, he doesn't become a zombie because he can regenerate. He just gains whatever powers that hero had. So Iron Man bites him, he becomes super intelligent. The Hulk bites him, he becomes Deadpool Hulk. Thor bites him, he becomes a really strong dude with anger issues. If Ant-Man bites him, he just becomes a guy and loses his superpowers, but gains a really awesome ant suit.
So the Marvel, where was it? Right, the Marvel Zombies episode of What If was like doing a brain. The Marvel Zombies episode of What If was doing a really good job at letting these characters have their powers while also being zombies.
Right.
One of the things that'd be really interesting about that is that there are multiple comic arcs in which characters want Peter's blood.
Ooh, as well as one TV or movie arc, which we're going to get to tonight.
In The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is like the fundamental premise of Morbius the Living Vampire.
Right.
Morbius gets and believes that Peter's radioactive blood will cure him. Peter gave a blood transfusion to Aunt May, and Aunt May got cancer in the process. Like, Peter's blood, do whatever we want solution in comics.
Right.
But it will only be a bad thing.
But didn't it also give Mary Jane cancer after they did the deed or something like that?
I don't remember that happening. Possible. I don't remember that.
I remember it from something. Let's see.
Because it'd be really interesting to see how a zombie reacts to biting Peter, or how Peter reacts as a zombie, or how Peter as a zombie would if he bit them.
My mic just went muted. Hang on. What the crap just happened? Okay. The fuck is happening? Okay. So I'm gonna reiterate that again because my mic was muted for everybody. In the comics, Peter gave MJ cancer due to his bodily fluids, and then had to choose between either sitting with her as she died or going to attend to gunshots outside, because of course it cannot be an easy decision.
Okay. So,
Moving back to the Amazing Spider-Man now.
yeah.
Okay, so what was your favorite part about this movie?
Gosh. The Batman Begins influence just because I really like Batman Begins.
That's good.
But in all seriousness, I think his suit is really cool. I think the web slinging right at the end is like really cool. The POV web slinging scenes really
Yes.
cool. There's another thing that I wanted to right particular moment that I think would have been that I think had some potential to be really cool, and I kind of just want to pitch this idea during the
Alright.
during the during the bridge fight
Okay.
when Peter's rescuing the kid. Now, to me, the big point of the scene is one, Peter recognizing the lizard, two, giving us three, cementing Peter's character arc as I've decided to be a good person now instead of being hateful.
Right.
I think it would have been really cool. It was named Ben.
Oh. Oh. Okay. I can see that.
Because
That
that
would be
kid
really
is
cool.
that kid is the first time Peter becomes a hero.
Right.
When Peter asks, "What's your name?" I fully expected him to reply, "Ben," and for Peter to be like, "Oh, I need to be a hero now."
Like, my name's Ben. Oh. Okay, you can fall now. I'm
No,
sorry.
I mean, like,
Just imagine,
it
like,
would have.
that's something Deadpool would do. He's like, "What's your name, kid?" The kid says some name, and Deadpool's like, "Oh, okay, you can die now."
No, I mean, like,
Oh,
it
that
would have been a
person.
perfect opportunity to for Peter to realize I can. It would have captured one of the intentions of the Save Martha moment from Batman v Superman. Yes, I recognize the execution doesn't work for everybody. I'm talking about the intention, not the execution, and this moment would have captured that intention.
On that, I've always had an idea on how you could salvage that scene, and instead of having Superman say "Save Martha," he should have said like "Save my mother," and then Batman should not have said anything. We should have just seen him go through the emotions of anger to fear to confusion to understanding, then to throwing the spear away and helping Superman to his feet. Not a single word, but Batman like thinking inside like this alien, this being from another planet has a mother. And in his dying moments, he would rather she be safe than him. Because Batman never got to save his parents. So, having this instead of him saying save Martha would really cement home that whole like idea in Batman's head of this guy is just like me, except he has power.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard a lot of people suggesting that it should have been Save My Mother.
Oh, okay.
I'm just.
Well, I'm not
Anyway,
special then.
no worries. The point is that, like, the thought is a prevalent thought, and apparently a lot of people agree.
Right.
What, what else?
What's up? I'm sorry, that cut off.
I missed what you said. Oh, I said, what else?
It cut off again. And he's gone again.
Okay, that was on purpose.
Okay. I thought it had just cut out and then you just you just left. It's just like your computer is just like, no, not today.
What else do you like about this movie?
I really so I know a lot of people don't like the crane scene close to the end, and I don't know. I understand why people aren't a big fan of it, and the fact that he's got all the buildings to swing on, like clear down to the Oscorp Tower. It doesn't make sense, but it's not supposed to. It's supposed to show that this, the people of New York love Spider-Man now and are willing to help him in accomplishing his goals, even though the police don't want them to. And so, like at that point, it doesn't have to make sense from a story point because we've already seen like Peter, in the original three Spider-Man, he can swing from buildings no problem. In this movie, it doesn't look like he really can do that yet. He's been mostly swinging from stuff above the street, like helicopters and street lamps and cranes. He hasn't really swung from a building that's perpendicular, perpendicular to the ground. And so it works. It's weird, but it's really hit me in the emotions when that scene started to play out because this is showing that the people of New York are finally coming around and saying like this guy is a hero and we need to protect him and we need to help him.
Yeah, I that's definitely one of the moments when like immersion is not the point. Why didn't they just is actively getting in the way of the point of the scene?
Right.
Because like you said, the point is that the people of New York are happy. I'm going to be honest. I don't really have that much else to say about this movie.
I agree. It was very. I don't know. I want to call it a non-movie, not because it was not a movie, but because there's not much to talk about when it comes to this movie. Because a lot of it was like stuff we've talked about in the original three movies, and a lot of other stuff is just not as interesting to talk about as the original three movies or as the Amazing Spider-Man 2 is going to be. I'm at this point trying to scrape to try and remember things because it was kind of forgettable.
I do have a couple rapid fire throw out there.
All right.
The chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone is like really good in this movie.
Yes.
Speaking of which, I love his performance. I am not going to say that he is the best Spider-Man. I am not interested in that conversation. In the words of Gwenpool, I love Spider-Man, all of them.
Right.
What I am going to say is that he is nailing as this Spider-Man. He's got a lot of subtle, nuanced acting ticks here that, like, if you... Okay, so I just watched Tick, Tick, Boom, like, 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Ish. Performance in Tick, Tick, Boom to his performance in this, you can tell they're both Andrew Garfield. Right. You can tell they're radically different performances by Andrew Garfield, and he's bringing a lot of very different mannerisms into it, to the point that like his accent is really layered in this movie, where he's got two different accents on top of each other.
Right.
It's really good actor. I haven't seen him in that much, but every single time I see him, he's got really good nuanced emotions, while also and playing a very tell. It's definitely Andrew Garfield.
Right. I saw him for the first time in The Social Network, and like the entire film, I was trying to contrast his character in The Social Network with Peter Parker, and in The Social Network, he's like smart but not too smart. He is it's hard to explain. He is basically a businessman in that. And in this movie, he's supposed to be playing a nerd. And while I'm not going to be the first person to say that I don't think he was he nailed Peter Parker the greatest. I think when he was trying to be nerdy and like he had his hair not in a frickin' perm, and he had the glasses on and he was stuttering and he was being that, he was really freaking good. But when he was like riding the skateboard and like being the cool guy almost with the freaking the hair, well, I will always go back to the hair. I don't like Peter Parker with that hair. He just looks too cool.
Oh,
and that's not what Peter Parker is supposed to be. Peter Parker is the nerd outcast. Andrew Garfield looked like the dude that you idolized in high school.
I mean, sure, he's Hollywood hot, but like he's nailing this performance. I kind of want to go watch Mainstream, which was his movie from 2020, just because Andrew Garfield is in it.
Okay.
And like he looks and acts Mainstream, and I'm really curious about that one. I just kind of just love his performance here. I also do think the hair works because, like you said, it's not kept hair. You can tell that he doesn't use product in the morning and that sort of stuff. He just like kind of rolled out of bed, kind of look at his hair. There's
Yeah.
one other thing.
But real quick, cause I thought, and like as I said earlier, I thought he was amazing as Spider-Man. He got the quips down right, he got the attitude down right, the swagger as he swings, all of that. I think Andrew Garfield absolutely nailed Spider-Man. His Peter Parker, at least when he was at school, could use work. I loved, as I said, I loved all the scenes with the unkempt hair that wasn't spiked straight up for some reason. When he was talking to Connors in like his lab, whenever he was like stuttering and putting on those Peter Parker mannerisms. But when he put on that suit and became Spider-Man, he was, and I'm willing to say this, I think he was perfect as Spider-Man in his mannerisms, in the way that he moved. Whereas I think Tobey Maguire was a really good, if not almost perfect Peter Parker. Andrew Garfield is an almost perfect Spider-Man. And that's one big reason that I'm so ready to get into the Homecoming trilogy, because I think that Tom Holland is the best blend of the two that we have gotten yet. Because you've got really good Spider-Man and really good Peter, and then that both come together for Tom Holland to create a very good character in general. He's not perfect on either side, but he is probably the best combined, at least in my opinion, that we've seen so far.
And there's one other thing, which, yeah, Andrew Garfield captures a lot of what people think of when they think of Spider-Man. I just also really like his portrayal as Peter.
That's good.
It's not that I think his portrayal of Peter is a comic accurate portrayal or is a correct portrayal. I just think he is giving his all to
Oh,
this.
definitely.
He is not phoning in anything. Like, look at the way just like his Adam's apple moves throughout the movie. It's very different from like his Adam's apple in Tick Tick Boom or the trailers from Mainstream. Like, he is using his Adam's apple to act. The corners of his lips, the corners of his eye, his shoulders. Like, this guy is really bringing a subtlety to this performance. That's mostly what I wanted to highlight. The last thing is just like the lizard. That's Jekyll and Hyde from the book.
Right, right.
Like, I've talked a lot on TikTok recently about how like you can't do a Jekyll and Hyde movie accurately today because the cultural concept has changed so much. Ever seen to how he works in the book is the lizard. It's still not completely Jekyll and Hyde. It's not quite the same thing, but like it's got the chemical, it's got the fact that his body changes, not just his personality. It's got Hyde being a killer, Jekyll being a doctor.
Right.
It's got Jekyll not really being a good person because of this serum. It's not like they split it into the good half and the evil half. No, a bad person. The fact that he uses the serum is proof that he's a bad person.
Right.
And like Kurt Connors, even when he's Kurt, you can serum. This is not a good person. I mean, sure, they don't have the mystery. Hyde still has superpowers. Just like, this is the closest that I've ever seen to a completely book accurate Jekyll and Hyde.
Right.
Okay, that was all I wanted.
That's all good. I do think though, like,
I'm sorry, there was another thing. I'm sorry, there was another thing.
It's all good.
Right, watching this right after the Sam Raimi intro, feel a little bit of how this movie is a bit of a response to Spider-Man 1, specifically in how Uncle Ben works.
Right.
Uncle Ben doesn't have a quippy catchphrase that he says inspires Peter. He states his philosophy very simply and plainly without elegance. He doesn't say with great power comes great responsibility. That's a Thomas Jefferson quote apparently. What he says is if your father believed that if you had the ability to help somebody, you had a you were obligated to help that person. You had a responsibility to help that person. That if you could help somebody, you had a responsibility to do so. Like, it's not an eloquent way of saying it. He's just saying what he believes.
Right.
And then the other big thing about Uncle Ben is that in Spider-Man 2002, Peter gets into a fight with Flash, and Uncle Ben says, "Dude, you shouldn't have gotten in a fight. There are other than fighting." In this one, Peter gets in a fight with Flash, and Uncle Ben replies, "So how's the other guy look? Come on, I know a right hook when I see one. Here, take this and put it on the wound."
But then,
Like, that is just a completely different response.
right. But then you've got the completely opposite response again when Peter humiliates Flash after Flash humiliated him, and Uncle Ben is completely did a 180 and he's now mad at Peter for it. When at the beginning he asked if Peter beat the other guy up rather than humiliating him. I think humiliation is better in a scenario like this specifically than a fight, because at least like in a fight the other guy's going to want to come back for more. You humiliate him and you like show him like you're not a pushover anymore, he's not going to want to come back because he doesn't want to be humiliated again.
Oh, it's not about what Peter. It's not about whether Peter fought or humiliated Flash. It's about why. The first time around, Uncle Ben is like, "Look, I'm just going to you're young, you're stupid, you're dangerous. I'm going to assume that you're not that you're either doing this because you're young, stupid, and dangerous, or that you had a good reason to."
Right.
But then after Flash beats up Peter, Uncle Ben is like, "Oh, okay, dude, don't get back at Flash. Don't try to get revenge."
Okay.
At least that's the way that I interpreted the scene of Uncle Ben saying, "So that's what this is about, getting even. You must feel really good about yourself." That's how I interpreted that scene.
Actually, that makes a lot more sense to me now. Because I didn't even think about that up until this point. So thank you. Actually, that actually really helped me.
Mostly, Uncle Ben just doesn't have context in this movie. I also love that Uncle Ben is out on the street interfacing with the gunman because he is looking for Peter.
Right.
Which means that, like, it is so much more Peter's fault.
Right.
Sure, he could have stopped the gunman, and he chose not to because he does something very similar to in Spider-Man 1, but also because Uncle Ben wouldn't have been out there if it weren't for Peter.
Right.
Really cool touch. Okay,
Yes,
yep.
I do like that touch.
That is everything that I have to say about The Amazing Spider-Man 1 for right now.
There was something else that I wanted to add. I cannot remember for the life of me what it was going to be. Oh, last thing I'm going to say. I really liked that Peter didn't hide his identity from Gwen Stacy like
Yes!
Toby did from MJ. I love that rooftop scene. How he's just like he's trying to tell her and he can't tell her. Then he goes back to trying to tell her. Then he can't tell her. And finally she goes to walk away and he uses the web shooter to pull her over. Not a word spoken, just showing her. Because I guarantee you, if he would have said like, "I am Spider-Man," she would have been like, "Ha, no, you're not. That's funny." And then it would have taken some back and forth, and then him showing her. But because he showed her to begin with, that whole Hollywood like cliche of the main character telling the other lead something, the other lead not believing the other person, no matter how much they tell them, that was completely like cut away, and it was just the proof. And I really liked that because I'm not a big fan of the whole "I'm this." No, you're not. Yes, I am. No, you're not. I am. Yes, prove it. Okay, I'll prove it. In here, it's just I am. Look, I am Spider-Man. Proof right there. Very simple.
Which, like, okay. I don't know how I didn't mention this at the beginning of the episode. This movie feels like a product of the superhero boom.
Yes,
That is not a bad thing. Like, most of the first half is asking the question, is Spider-Man a good person, or do we just believe that because the word hero is in the word superhero?
Right.
It's a lot darker in tone. That's not to say that all superhero boom movies are dark, and that's something that's much more boom era than Renaissance. But the other big thing is that like the lack of secret identity in this movie. Almost every single main character by the end of this movie knows Peter's secret identity.
Right. And I guarantee
There are
you,
only 5 main characters, and 4 of them at the end of the movie, and like that's including Aunt May, and she barely shows up in this movie.
right.
The
But
only
even
person who
even
doesn't know
then,
Peter's identity by the end of the movie is Aunt May.
I interpreted the end of this movie as Aunt May knowing Peter's identity. Cause like I've like the entire film, you were getting like little hints and stuff of Aunt May like wondering why Peter was constantly coming home bruised, and then seeing on the news, and then finally at the end of the film, that glance that she gave towards the camera, I assumed that as she figured it out. Either she felt the suit on his body, or she realized like Spider-Man was just fighting the lizard. My nephew comes home battered and beaten up and scraped up and all that sort of stuff. My nephew is Spider-Man, but I'm not going to say anything yet because he is in pain and he doesn't need anyone to know who he is. He just needs comfort. And I think in the second movie we're going to get a similar scene to what we got with Aunt May in the Raimi trilogy. I think it was the Raimi trilogy where it was like Peter goes to tell Aunt May that he's Spider-Man, and she says something similar to "I've known for a while" or "I've always known," or "You think you can hide that from me?" It's very obvious when you come home beaten and bruised after a supervillain attack.
I definitely didn't interpret that scene that way, but I really like that interpretation, and I
Okay,
think it brings a lot of really interesting character dynamics into Aunt May and Peter's dynamic in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. You'll see why tonight.
gotcha.
But like, there's no indication of that in The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Really?
Like, Peter, or at least Peter doesn't think that Aunt May knows. But if Aunt
Okay.
May does know, that brings a really interesting dynamic of like Peter thinking she doesn't while she really does, and it really changes the laundry scene in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. You'll see what I mean.
Okay.
Um, okay. Anything else you want to talk about this movie?
There was a reference in Gwen Stacy's apartment number being 2016 to the fact that uh, each of these Amazing Spider-Man films are coming out 2 years apart. This one's 2012. Then there's 2014. The 2016 would have been where we got the Sinister Six movie, Peter Parker versus Sinister Six. We never got that, which I don't think that was an Easter egg intentionally put there. If it was, that is genius. I wish it would have gone through, but it led way to Tom Holland. So, we still got something in 2016 with the Captain America Civil War. So it still ended up being an Easter egg for something. On top of that, I think that's it. I want to talk a little bit more about the superhero boom in general and my thoughts that maybe we're no longer in the superhero boom, but we will talk about that tonight with The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Sounds
Anything else
good.
you want to say about this movie?
No, no. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right. The
Amazing Spider-Man 2 tonight because I really enjoy that movie. Thanks so much for listening. You can find our socials in the description below, and have a wonderful day.